Out here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of the singer, songwriter, filmmaker, author, poet, and music producer. It can only be the one and only Jude Rawlins, who I spoke to very recently to find out more about life, love, and poetry, and all that other groovy stuff. Anyway, he's done a phenomenal amount of work and has one time been a member of the Lena Lovitch band, which we'll find out more in this fascinating interview. Anyway, look, there's lots of detail, so make notes. I will test you at the end. But anyway, look, after several minutes of casual chat, we got down to that very exciting subject that was the early formative years. Jude, it's over to you.
At a very young age, I did actually. Yeah, I can actually tell you the exact date. It was.
I like dates.
It was New Year's Day, 1978, and basically, I was talking to my dad about, well, what happens to 1977 now? Does it ever come again? And he's explaining to me, no, that's it. It's gone forever now. And it was a really strange realization and a sort of ephemeral moment. And my mother was downstairs playing a record at the time, and the music that she was playing suddenly registered with me. And it was actually Linda Ronstadt's first solo album, and her version of the Dolphins. I distinctly remember hearing that at that particular moment, and I just became almost instantly fascinated with music, and especially with vinyl records, and they became a kind of something almost sacred quite quickly. And I used to play my parents' records to pieces, and then of course eventually you start hearing your own music. And I think the watershed moment for me there was seeing Whistle Test on TV. I think it was on a Thursday night then.
Yes.
So Top of the Pops would be on BBC One, which was all very well planned and well rehearsed and very polished and everything. And then you switch over to BBC Two, and this really weird show with like live performance and strange animations and stuff would come on, and that was always more interesting to me, And I remember, well, I couldn't remember any specific bands, but what I do remember was seeing Passions on Top of the Pops performing I'm in Love with a German Film Star, which I guess was 1981 or something.
Yes.
And I'd never heard music like that. And the idea of music was something far more ephemeral and weird and inventive than I had realized. And it could go anywhere and do anything and be anything. It kind of sort of struck me then. And then within about a year, I discovered punk, and I was kind of on my way.
Yes, God, that's amazing. So were your parents quite hip and happening in a sort of musical kind of way?
In their own way. I mean, I was from a very working class, council estate on the southern side of Birmingham, and my dad worked in Woolworths on the record counter, and he would, when records got scratched and they were throwing them away, he would rescue them and bring them home. So we had all kinds of weird stuff coming in the house all the time,
My God, yeah.
And I'd usually give it a listen. And I remember one day he brought home Dame Edna Everidge's Every Mother Wants a Boy Like Elton. And and I remember hearing the B-side, which was her doing a spoof punk song called S&M Lady. And I remember hearing this, and that was probably the first time I ever heard punk, because it was with the spoof version. And then around about the same time, I remember seeing graffiti around town, and I saw the name Sex Pistols for the first time sprayed on a wall somewhere, So it gradually started to seep into my psyche, and then as a teenager, it all started to connect up,
Yes, absolutely. And with going back earlier, was the Dolphin Song, was that Tim Hardin who did the?
Yeah, he wrote I think he wrote it, and a few people recorded. Tim Buckley did a great version of it actually on Sophronia.
I think that's the one. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually his version is amazing, but it was the version on Hands Sewn Homegrown was the name of the album. I think it was the closing track on it, and that whole album actually meant quite a lot to me. And then, you know, the albums in my parents' collection at that time, which were quite a lot of Elton John, but on my mum's side, and some Elvis Presley, and then you know, a few kind of like Stranger Things, like I'm trying to think of an example now. Well, Joni Mitchell's Hijira, which had the most fascinating album cover, I remember. And I didn't understand the music at all, but I couldn't stop listening to it because I loved their voice so much.
Yes. Is that the one with it's got a track called Black Crow on it?
I might do. I don't remember that one. It's a few years since I've heard it. It's the one with Furry Sings the Blues.
Yes, God, that is stunning. But I think there is one about Black Crow, and I do think, I do know that album.
The opening song is this really beautiful song called Amelia, and she had a great band at the time. She had people like Jaco Pastorius in her backing band. You know, it's. I mean, obviously, I was too young to appreciate any of this then, but it's funny how, you know, I'm one of these people who, having gone through, you know, 30, 40 years almost of listening to music, I've come back around to the stuff that I was listening to when I first started listening to music, and thought, actually, it is really good. I still really love it, you know.
Yes. Well, I think that Joni Mitchell period with Blue, Cotton Spark, and the hissing of summer lawns as well as Hajara are just kind of incredible. But I do like some of the earlier stuff because it's just the lyrical content of it.
Well, what was it? The Clouds. I think that might have been her first album, actually. I mean, that's an amazing record. It's a stunningly well written record, you know. And it has the opening song on that. I think it's Tin Angel, and she mentions the Bleecker Street Cafe in it, where they all used to hang out at the time. And I remember being in New York and being in Bleecker Street and looking for the cafe. I was on the phone to my dad at the time in England, and I was like, "Hey, Dad, I'm in Bleecker Street." You know, it's one of those.
Well, it's important, yes.
Shared moments, you know.
Did it also have Chelsea Morning on that one as well? Mm-hmm. Woke Up, it was a Chelsea Morning.
Yeah, that's the very next song on the album after Tin Angel. Yeah.
Was that the one that starts about I've got to find someone to love today? Or
yeah, that's Tin Angel. Yeah. God, in the Bleecker Street Cafe, I found someone to love today. Yeah.
That's the line. God, I tell you, that is. I do love those, and it's going back to that song. Was it Furry
Sings the Blues? Yeah.
And she sort of talks the narrative, doesn't she? Sort of, and everybody, suddenly he says something, and everyone laughs, and the way she describes that scene is.
Yeah. She even does his voice when she's doing the line that he's supposed to be saying. She actually puts on this gruff voice when she does it, you know.
Yeah, I know. Well, when she did the Miles of Isles album, I know she puts a little bit on there when, you know, she does the waitress voice on whatever song it is. And again, I thought that was amazing. Yeah, no, I mean, I don't think that ever kind of dates. You might get a bit bored and think, I'll give it a miss. But then come the autumn, I always find myself going towards Blue. You know, Blue suddenly comes on the turntable, like, you know, the first hot day of summer, you put on the hiss of the summer lawns.
Actually, I listened to Ladies of the Canyon not that long ago, and it's still an amazing, I mean, those albums, you know, and For the Roses, that whole period, she was just unassailably good, really, and not like anybody else at all, you know.
No.
Apparently, I heard that For the Roses was Kate Bush's favourite album. I don't know if that's true, but it makes a kind of sense if it was.
Yeah, I would have thought so. It was that. And then obviously we got Carole King's Tapestry as well. But... So when did you leave, so you came from South Birmingham. Were you part of that scene? Did you see I was going to say, you know what I'm going to talk about, King Rocker, the film about Robert Lloyd and the Nightingales. Did you see the film?
You know what? I haven't seen that, but it was produced by my former manager and the record label that my band Subterraneans was signed to.
Fire.
They actually funded that film, so I haven't seen it. But they also funded Oil City Confidential. You know, the Dr. Feelgood,
yeah. Nice. Well, there you go. Yes, I did an interview with your man and Stuart Lee. It was a 3-way chat.
Chris Carr.
Yeah.
Really?
Well, he was the other one in the interview. I must admit, there was Stuart Lee. He was a bit like, oh my God, there's Stuart Lee talking about it. And then the other guy who produced it. And
England, maybe. And I mean, I actually saw, because funnily enough, the last time I saw any of those guys was at a Dream Syndicate gig at the Lexington in London the night before I flew to the States, and Stuart Lee was there with them, and I didn't quite know why he was there, but then later on I found out it's because they were working on this project, the Nightingales film, with him.
Right. So it must have been him, because to be honest, it was like, oh yes, this is the guy who's also sort of part of it, and do you want to interview all of them? It's like, oh yeah, fair enough. So that was we got a taste of Birmingham at that stage, didn't we, in our lives, the sort of the late 70s and early 80s. So that was so did you stay in Birmingham for your kind of the growing teen period as well, and sort of
I had my first band from when I was 15, and so yeah, that's where we were based, and we were playing around, that area, the south side of town, and it was around about the same time. There were a few bands from that area that came through at that time, like the Primitives was one.
God, we love Tracy.
Yeah, and I had not seen them in person since about 1987, 88, and then I played the Rebellion Festival with Lena a couple of years ago, and we were on the bill with them, and so we had a big reunion. It was kind of fun. And
were the Photos from that area as well? A band called the Photos?
There was a band called the Pictures. They were from Rubery, yeah. I don't remember the Photos though.
Oh, the Photos. No, there was definitely a band called the Photos. So, what year was your sort of when you were hanging out with the Primitives?
That would have been 87.
Right. So they were well on their way with Crash and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So did you?
Well, actually, no, they hadn't released it yet when I first met them. They were still they were still on Lazy, the independent label, and
the Lazy record. Yes.
Yeah. And then also the other band that was really happening at the time around there was Fuzzbox, who were signed to a label called Vindaloo.
Robert Lloyd.
Yeah. Exactly, yeah. And they were, actually Maggie from Fuzzbox is still a friend of mine, and so is Vix. So I still occasionally, communicate with them on Facebook, and, we're, so it was an interesting time. But the funny thing is that none of those bands were ever cool with Music Press. The Music Press hated Birmingham and everything about it.
Yeah, that's a bit strange, really, because I have to say, there were such a sort of amazing scene, because you had people like Terry and Jerry who were stunning, and then you had, like you said, we've got a Fuzzbox, we're going to use it with their classic albums, Boston, Steve Austin,
yeah,
and then the Mighty Lemon Drops with David Newton as well.
Oh, I absolutely love the Lemon Drops. They're like one of my. They were amazing. They were truly amazing. I'm still kind of miffed that they're not as legendary as they should be. I don't know if you. There's like somebody posted the live version of Happy Head on YouTube, and I saw it, and I'd forgotten how good they were live. They were a really truly brilliant band.
Yes, well, I do remember when John Peel played Like an Angel, and sort of having to go and buy it straight away. And it just, because coming from Norwich, and you probably realise this a bit, we were a little bit starved with music. We had the Higgs and Cirrus Drinking and the Farmers Boys, which were fantastic, but there wasn't a huge amount going on. But then, listen to John Peel religiously throughout the 80s. There was always kind of, oh yes, this band from Birmingham and this band from, it was like, God, how many bands did you get? And then you had Ted Chippington, who did that great Vindaloo special with Rockin' with Rita, which
I think I was the first person in my town, certainly in my school, to own a copy of I Don't Want to Live with Monkeys by the Higsons. And I still to this day remember how much fun that record was.
Yes, but then it all puttered out, and we just all went, oh, look at that, it's all happening in Manchester. It's happening everywhere apart from Norwich.
That was the bane of our existence, really, was that we weren't from Manchester. And there was a journalist from the NME called Delhi for Delhi, and I knew Delhi really well, and like years later I asked him, it's like, you're always at my shows. All you people, when they want a night off, they come to my gigs, but they never wrote about me, at the time. And like, what's going on? And he said, well, they were basically under orders not to write about anyone who wasn't from Manchester. That was just an edict from the editors at the time. And I thought that's typical, But the charlatans actually lied and said they were from Manchester, and they got written about.
Yes, that is. Yeah, I mean, looking back at the press, because I did an interview at the weekend with a guy who was in the band Shelley Ann Orphan.
Oh yeah,
and
who was that? Who was that?
Gem.
Okay, I remember them very well.
And I mean, it was like, I mean, actually, there's part of the story which was kind of, even now, is a bit upsetting, really.
Caroline died, I think.
Pardon?
Didn't Caroline Crawley passed away, I think, a few years
ago?
ago.
No, she died 5 years ago, but there was another story he told me, which was a bit kind of quite horrendous. But kind of, yeah. But yeah, he said that they just went, oh, this middle-class band. He said, I was born in Bournemouth. I left school at 16 with 3 O levels. We went to London. We just wanted to make an original sound. That's our thing. We were. He said we were punk. We wanted to make something that wasn't just run of the mill. So we use this, we use that, and all they could say was, "Oh, you just middle class." It's like, please, do some research. I've got 3 O levels, and I come from a poor, working class family. It's like just because, we try to do something different. You don't have to just always say this is the worst record in the world, but that's all they got,
Well, they're obsessed with class culture, absolutely obsessed with it. And, it's one of the things that I was always hugely uncomfortable with that, and it's been one of the biggest revelations of my life. It's been coming to America and realizing it literally doesn't exist here. I mean, there is a class system, but it's not like we're used to, when you whatever it is you are, that's it for life,
Yes, it's a very strange thing, because I suppose I was born in the countryside of East Anglia, so things like punk didn't happen, and to be honest, we were sort of left, and having working class parents, it was just leave school at 16 with a CSE.
Oh gosh, I remember those. Yeah, I was actually my year was the first year to do the GCSE.
Right, nice. They had aspirations, didn't they? So look, we mentioned post-punk, which was very exciting, including all those bands like Peel and Magazine and the Nightingales, The Fall. And then for me, 83, massive year, the Smiths appeared. Then for 5 years we had the Smiths. Yeah. And that period was quite golden. So what were you sort of doing during that period? Had you left school by then?
No, I was still at school in 83. I mean, I was still at school when the Smiths came out, but I certainly remember what a watershed moment that was for everybody, especially, let's face it, working class white kids, because, we'd all grown up with the, whole attitude, the boys don't cry attitude, and everything. And to suddenly have, working class white kids from Manchester on TV waving flowers around and saying it's okay to have feelings was like it was a massive, huge deal. To this day, I like to impress upon people how important the Smiths were. I mean, if you were literally if you were a council estate kid or wherever in Thatcher's Britain at that time, they were the first real kind of almost like Road to Damascus bands. In fact, I don't remember another band having the effect that they had on my generation. And they were kind of our band. They were they were really, really, really important. And I was listening at that point. I was listening to punk, and I was listening to post-punk, and probably my favorite bands that were kind of already happening at that point was Echo and the Bunnymen, who I always loved, and Psychedelic Furs and all that kind of stuff was a really, really big deal. But then when the Smiths came along, that was a whole other separate thing, really. There was music and there was the music scene, but then there was the Smiths, which is more like a religion.
Yes, well, I completely agree. The Smiths. Yeah. I suppose it was kind of interesting because at that stage we'd had sort of bands like Simple Minds and U2 and Echo and the Bunnymen, but I know, obviously U2 still continued, but there was something like, God, the Smiths are here now, like suddenly.
It changed everything, yeah.
It did, and there was something that almost left people like Echo and the Bunnymen and Pete Wiley and people like that a little bit behind. I suppose they might have got a bit complacent and thought we're the hot thing, and then suddenly.
Well, I mean, I think some of those bands still went on to make great records after that, but it was, yeah. I mean, in terms of there actually being like a zeitgeist moment for people like us, it was the Smiths, and unassailably so. And I mean, other people made great music, but everything the Smiths did was like, hugely important for our survival.
Yes, absolutely. And were you sort of feeling at that stage that music was going to be your passion and career?
Oh yeah, I already knew that. Yeah, I already knew that. I mean, I never entertained anything else. When I was like 5 years old, I used to sing into a biro with a piece of string tied to it to make it feel like a microphone, and sing along to like Elvis Presley songs, and I don't know. I was never going to do anything else. I almost like it always felt like it chose me. I didn't even have a choice in it, really.
Yes. And when did you first get a guitar?
I was 15, I think, and I went to there used to be a frozen food supermarket called B Jams, and I got a part-time job in there, getting paid £1.20 an hour, and I managed to save up 30 quid, and I bought a 1960s Japanese guitar, a Zenta guitar, which was a complete piece of junk, but it was a guitar. It was an electric guitar, and I couldn't afford an amplifier, so we just plugged it into an old record player.
And off you went. And did you suddenly think this is it? We're on the way?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I used to get a little bit resentful because we were using. I mean, I remember we actually, me and the bass player, we walked one night. We walked like 5 miles out into the middle of nowhere to buy a secondhand bass off somebody for like £20, which I think was like a satellite bass. It's the cheapest bass ever made. And then we walked all the way home with it because we didn't have extra money for the bus fare, so we actually had to just walk out, for 5 miles and then carry this thing home. And, so we went to those kind of lengths just to get these cheap, terrible instruments. And then when we started playing, there were a lot of middle-class bands who were basically spending their student grants on really expensive equipment, and they all sounded great. I remember, seeing Ride, and they all had Fenders and Rickenbackers and all this sort of stuff. And we were like traipsing around in the middle of nowhere with West Tones and satellites.
Yes, my God, that's quite something, isn't that?
But we made that part of the sound. We played into that, and that became a signature of what we did. And it didn't sound like what everyone else was doing. That was what was fun about it.
Yes. And did you? I mean, at what stage did you sort of form your first band?
Well, that was 87. I mean, I actually, I did front a punk band when I was like 12 years old, 13 or something like that. But my first real band was when I was 15, which was a band called Angel Head.
Right.
And we got a deal with Rough Trade, and we did some stuff, and it all went wrong pretty quickly. We had about a 4-year run with that band, and then and it all kind of split up because we were so naive. It was like there were a lot of poor decisions being made, and a lot of different drugs being imbibed, and just a lot of screwing up, basically.
Yes, well, it's good to do it once. Yeah. So you were on Rough Trade Records?
Yeah, in 1989.
89.
Yeah.
That is a bit of a watershed moment in Rough Trade history, isn't it? Really?
Oh yeah. I mean, it was catastrophic for me to ever be involved with that label. I mean, I say that, but actually, it was catastrophic in so far as like we had a licensing deal with them, and when they went bankrupt in 1991, we should have got all our rights back. But what happened was because they got bought out by several major labels who kind of and they had loads of debts, so the receivers never allowed us to get our rights back, and they went up with Sony, and it was just it was a complete nightmare, and we didn't have the money to fight it, So, but what it meant was that I came out of that situation, out of that band, understanding a hell of a lot more about the business than I did before, and that put me in very good stead later on.
Yes, well, I would imagine, actually. And did you get around to recording an album?
Yeah, we actually recorded. I think we recorded 2.5 albums, as well as lots and lots of demos and a couple of EPs, and, which EPs were very much the culture of the time, and yeah, we did. I mean, nothing ever lasted very long in those days because of what we used to call shelf life, So
yes,
if you weren't on a major label, if you were on a tiny little independent label, and then your rights went into kind of some sort of limbo, just you forget about having a record out. It just wasn't possible because you couldn't fight the business in those days.
that is such an amazing thought, actually, isn't it? Angel head, blimey. Yeah. So do you sort of have any right over it at the moment? Any sort of access to it?
I did get the rights back there a few years ago because the publishing period expired. Luckily, the publishing wasn't with the same company, and that period, I think it was like 25 years or something, and it expired. So I got the publishing rights back, and then I went to Sony and said, "Are you ever going to do anything with this material?" And they didn't realise they had it. It meant nothing to them. So I did get the rights back, but we haven't done anything with it because I don't. I've got too many other things to do, really.
Yes,
I'm not going to fall over myself to do repackaged, reissue stuff that I recorded when I was 17, which I don't even listen to. So.
Yes, but it's just kind of an interesting period because I know we were talking about genres, but there was a sort of for me, the 80s, there was definitely a moment where between 83 to 87, the Smiths had such a big kind of like chapter and importance. And when they broke up and then, ecstasy comes along as well as other things, but also the next generation of 16 to 18-year-olds are looking for their sound, and obviously there was kind of the move towards the kind of rave culture with the Soup Dragons and Happy Mondays, and I suppose you mentioned the Charlatans as well, didn't you? And Primal Scream and
Stone Roses,
and the Little Old Stone Roses, and so there was that kind of things are moving and changing kind of again. So
I really hated all that stuff. There was one band in particular which represented everything that I hated, which was the Mock Turtles, and I just that there were all these kind of guitar bands that were more than willing to compromise everything to sort of jump on the Manchester thing, which of course started out as electronic music, and the kind of hacienda scene and the acid house stuff. That's where that all began. So seeing these indie bands trying to fit in with that just struck me as like a marketing device, really. Probably not all of them. There were probably some of them that were genuine, but it meant absolutely nothing to me because I wanted to completely change the form by then, and make as much noise as possible, and didn't want to fit in with any of that stuff, So I wasn't that sorry that we never did fit in with it.
No, absolutely. But how did it then? Because quite quickly there was the sort of that suddenly everything's like, the Seattle scene is coming. And I remember John Peel playing this compilation, the Sub Pop 100 series, and there was like bands like Nirvana who suddenly came to the Norwich Arts Centre supporting Tad in '89.
Yeah, I was actually talking about that tour yesterday to somebody. The tour that people forget because Nirvana were the completely unknown support act the first time they came to the UK, and there's quite a few stories about that era.
Yes, but interestingly, when they came to Norwich, I did an interview with the 3 members of Nirvana, which I still have on tape, and I have slightly archived it. So yes, I had 45 minutes in the company of them, having a chat about life. And to be honest, I didn't, it was just one of those things. I'd only heard that, I got the album Bleach, which I thought was fantastic, but then I didn't really know. So they filled me in with what life was like in Seattle, which sounded quite grim, actually. But it was quite.
there was a band from Seattle that I was already into at that point, which called the Gits, and they were almost completely unknown outside Seattle. And I can't quite remember how I came to first hear them, but I absolutely loved them. And so I grew quite an affinity for the sort of American bands at the time, but also because I wasn't into the kind of whole Manchester scene. The bands that really reached me in the late 80s were, the American bands that were signed to labels like 4AD in the UK. So like Throwing Muses, Pixies, Ultra Vivid Scene, stuff like that. And they were like just on the cusp, just before kind of grunge happened. And, I think a lot of the grunge bands were fans of those bands as well, so that was the sort of the crossing over point for me. But then also there was a short burst of something happening in the UK at that time, which was what they now call shoegaze, but which was bands like Ride and My Bloody Valentine and stuff like that, and
Galaxy 500.
Yeah, Galaxy 500. Yeah, well, they were American though. And,
yeah, well spotted.
Yeah, but they were definitely part of that era, and.
But then with that scene, there was the great, and this is the kind of the home of shoegaze, I suppose, was the Sarah Records.
Yeah.
The home of Sarah Records with all those bands.
Yeah.
Tallulah Gosh, let's face it, we love them.
And actually, there was a really good band. Was it Bleach? They were from Norwich, weren't they?
Ipswich.
No, they were from Ipswich. Yeah, that's right. I remember now. That's coming back to me. There were a few bands from over east. Yeah, the Charlottes. They were from the east as well, and actually the band that really meant the most to me from that whole era was Curve, who were like a quantum leap really for, especially if you were in the industry, if you were in a band at the time, because Curve made all their records in the basement in the house. They didn't use commercial studios when they started out, and you were able to go to your record label and say, "Here's this really noisy racket that we made in the garage, and we want you to release that as a record." And don't say no, because Curve make all their records in the basement, and they're in the charts. So
yes. But that period of the late 80s, there was the whole squat scene, wasn't there? Especially in London, with a place, ambulance station, that had lots of obscure bands like the Hangman's Beautiful Daughters. But then also you had that North London scene with people like My Bloody Valentine and Silverfish and the
Camden, the whole kind of Camden elite.
The elite, I know.
Yeah. And they used to drink in the Good Mixer in Inverness Street. Yeah.
And Phil King seemed to be in most bands at that time.
That's right, yeah, he was. And the only band he wasn't in was Lush, and later on he was in Lush. So,
So yes, dear old Phil King. So, so there was that whole scene going on as well, the sort of the groovy people. Because I remember seeing there was a couple of amazing tours. There was like My Bloody Valentine at the Arts Centre with Silverfish playing. And then I did see the Pixies and Throwing Muses at the UEA on a double bill tour as well. So, I mean, 89 was a good year for sort of tours. I thought, apart from the dance scene from Manchester, or Madchester.
I mean, Throwing Muses gave a lot of starts to a lot of bands, actually, because I think the 89 tour, the support act on that tour was the Sundays. I remember that's the first time I ever saw the Sundays was opening for Throwing Muses. And of course, they became a really big deal in their own right as well, and
I know.
So I mean, Kristen Hirsch just has more taste than anybody else I've ever met. So.
Yes, well, absolutely, and yes, still doing it. Did you read her book?
I know her very well. She's a good friend of mine. Yes, the book is amazing. It's hilarious. No, it's very, very. I'm so glad she wrote a book, because I always thought, that the way her mind works, it would be so entertaining to see that laid out on a page. So, and the new one apparently is even better.
Oh right, I've only come across the one that came out this year, probably.
Yeah.
So so now I think she's with Fred, isn't she, again? So
yeah. And in fact, her drummer Rob and I are making some plans to do some stuff as well. because I
Yeah.
need, I mean, if I was to record something now in America, it's like, well, who am I going to call in America? So who's the best drummer I know this side of the pond? And it's definitely Rob. So Rob Ehlers from Kristin's band.
Yes, you're probably quite spoiled, aren't you, actually, for drummers? But then, what happens then once Angel Head? Did you have a moment where you just all said, "That's it"? You did a Ziggy Stardust and sort of finished the band.
I really felt like we couldn't start again when things like when Rough Trade collapsed and we had management problems. I think we had like 5 different managers in 4 years, and it just.
My God, you sound like Morrissey.
Yeah, it was really, really difficult, and it was physically very challenging, and there was proper insanity going on at that time, as well as lots and lots of drugs and lots of and somebody was going to get killed eventually. So and then our bass player quit because he actually wanted to move to Manchester, and I think he's the only musician who's ever lived in Manchester who wasn't in the Fall at any point, and he had his own band called Lost in Space for a while, who were kind of fun. But we just sort of we kept it going for a little while, but we couldn't get back on the road for various reasons, and in the end, I just decided I wanted to try doing something else. So
yes, you didn't sort of get swept along with that whole Grebo scene of like Pop Will Eat Itself and
no, but I knew them. I knew them. I actually, they were. I actually quite like Pop Will Eat Itself, and I was very close to Mark from Census Things, Mark Keds. I knew him for seemingly forever, and he passed away recently, a few months ago.
Yes, Cheesy Crazy. I just did an interview with Kaz, the drummer.
Yeah.
On Friday. That was.
Yeah.
That gets messy, doesn't it? Really.
I mean, it was wild. They were fairly insane times. Yeah. Sure.
But at the same time, as he was saying, that it was quite extraordinary that the amount of gigs they played at that stage, and they would just say to the promoter, can we come and support this band? And mainly because they just thought, well, that would mean that we can get in free, and then we can see the main band that we would like to see.
I used to get gigs by giving the wrong directions to the support band, so they wouldn't show up at the venue, and then we just turn up with our instruments and volunteer to fill in. So all that kind of stuff happened. Yeah.
So were you still based in Birmingham at that stage, or had you gone to?
That was no. I left. After Angel Head broke up. I left Birmingham, and I went around a few places for a while, but inevitably wound up in London at that point.
Yes. So then your next band, the Subterraneans.
Yeah.
How did that sort of develop?
Well, what happened there was that there was a bit of interest in me from the industry for what I was going to do next after Angel Head, and and I decided that I had a couple of offers, and I had a. The funny thing was, the catalyst for all this was a telephone conversation with Tony Halliday, who was the singer in Curve. She called me up one day and talked to me for hours, and I was like, well, what am I going to do? I don't know what I'm going to do. And she says, well, you just do it again, only this time you do it better, and she was right, and also I'd grown up a little bit, and I knew a bit more. I was a bit more savvy about the industry by that point, and I had this offer on the table from a major label, actually. And I realized in that process, that I didn't possess the solo mentality that you really, really need to have if you're going to go solo. So I realized that what I wanted to do was start another band. But I realized the best way for me to go about that, to really, really do what I wanted to do musically, was to make the record myself, and we're just pulling in one or two other people, and then let the sound that we naturally created develop into a band. So Subterraneans really began as a solo project, but it grew into a band kind of, by the time the first album was finished, we were a real band,
And that
it was very much a case of I could just play to people what we were doing and say, what do you think? Are you into this? And we had some interesting people trying out for us at one point.
Yes. Did you? Because you got it was a 4-piece, wasn't it, with
Yeah.
Guy, Robin, and Carl? Did you all
That's
sort of? How did you all sort of find? Was it just kind of an organic process? That
Well, I already knew Carl. Carl was he's from my hometown, and he started playing guitar, and he was technically very good, and also he had access to some equipment, but Carl had done things like he shot videos for Angelhead and stuff, because he was the only person we knew with a video camera. And,
yes.
So I already knew him, and then he was playing guitar, and he was at university then, and he was playing guitar in I think it was a production of The Wall, Pink Floyd thing that he was doing that's Cambridge Uni, and it was a whole other world to what I was used to, but technically he was very, very good, and I was the renegade element of the band, so I would make a horrendous noise which made it all very exciting, but then he would rein it in and keep it going in a certain direction, so the combination of the two of us seemed to work quite well. And then we found eventually we found Guy, who was like old enough to be our dad. Basically, he played with Van de Graaff Generator, and that was his band for years. But he was just technically and musically the best musician I'd ever heard, and I was like, I really want to work with him. And then we all got along so well that just gelled. And Robin was somebody who he knew, and when Robin came in, Robin's like the quietest, most gentle person you could ever meet. He's like the classic proper bass player. Like the Paul Jones. He's that good. But he's also like really sweet, and you can't help but like him. And we'd been through. I think at one point we even auditioned Paul Raven from Killing Joke wanted to get involved with us, and he was off his face all the time every time I met him, and I thought, that's not going to work, because I was trying to get away from all that stuff.
Yes.
And then when Robin showed up at my flat in Camden, and I'd sent him some songs on a tape, and he came like a week later, and he knew all the songs, and he played them perfectly. So we went out for fish and chips, and by the end of that, I just knew that was it. We had our band now.
Yes, absolutely. My God, I would imagine you must have got a bit bored with the rock and roll lifestyle, actually.
Yeah. I didn't want to die. I wanted to live, and and it was an interesting process, like getting into, trying to live a sober lifestyle amongst all that. I actually found it pretty easy, because once I was stone cold sober, I realised how embarrassing everybody else was when they weren't. So,
my God! And then you must have had to live through the whole Brit pop period during your London phase, which was quite sort of cocaine and champagne, really, wasn't it?
Yeah. And I was living on Chalk Farm Road, so it was literally happening outside my front door.
My God, you must have seen Phil King every day walking by.
Oh, just that's the least of it. I mean, the person who I used to see all the time was the guy from the Hotels. Luke Haynes. I used to see Luke Haynes all the time, wandering up and down outside my house. And eventually, if you live in Camden High Street, eventually you meet everybody, And I worked on. I was working on the t-shirt store. I worked on there was a stall on the market on the high street outside the Oxford Arms selling bootleg music videos, and I worked on there until I got arrested because Mick Jagger made a complaint about me. And then I moved on to selling t-shirts, and I used to be outside in the freezing cold weather, and Joe Strummer used to bring me hot chocolate.
Nice.
He felt sorry for me, so, and he used to hang out and just hang. He used to hang out all afternoon, just talking about music and politics, everything.
So yes, so Mick wasn't so keen, was he? Really?
No, he had me arrested. Yeah.
God, that's
another story, though.
That is another story, isn't it? But so your first album, which was April, May, June.
Yeah.
Did that come together relatively easily? The writing.
No. I was struggling with a lot of personal problems when I made that album, and it took far too long, and I couldn't get anything right. I couldn't get anything to sound the way I wanted it to, and but eventually, we got there, and when it came out, we had pressed like 100 white label copies of it and sent them to clubs, which isn't the way you would normally do that kind of music, and it got picked up in Europe, especially like places like Paradiso in Amsterdam.
Mm-hmm.
There was a song on it called Dream Fades into Dark, which they used to play every Friday night at the Paradiso, and apparently it was like really, really big with the dance kids, and so they had their band, their sort of like electro bands, like Erotic Dissidents and Taste of Sugar and all those sort of things, who would be playing our record before they came on, which was really bizarre. So we got into a bit of a crossover situation in Europe, which really launched us, sort of saved us actually, and it got us away from needing to go crawling to the music industry every time we wanted to do something,
So with that particular release, were you on a label at this stage, or did you?
We had our own label. After my experience with Rough Trade, I decided I never wanted to be in a situation where we owed money. I mean, I was quite frugal all the time, even in the Angelhead days. When we got some money from anything, I would buy equipment with it. So because my feeling was, if we're going to go broke, let's go broke with all the gear we need to make a record. Rather than and that's why the Curve situation was so important, because it meant that we could argue that the record we made in the living room was good enough to release because it's good enough for them, And so when it came to Subterraneans, I actually put my foot down and I was like, I never once recorded in a commercial studio ever again. We're always going to make records in our own way, in our own time, on our own equipment, and have a completely take it or leave it approach to releasing it. And it meant I never had to go to labels for money to make records, So I would bring a finished product and say, do you want to license this for 3 years or 5 years or whatever? And they didn't have to lay out any money to do it. So but eventually somebody would always do it for you, so we always put a record out for you.
That's interesting, because I did an interview with Miles Copeland, who had a similar experience after his various kind of disasters in the early 70s, kind of doing various tours and stuff. He, obviously he was part of the Police. Yeah. But they'd recorded the album and it was all done. So he just took it to various labels, including A&M. And it was a bit like, well, you don't have to go to your accountant and work out if you've got the money. It's done. You just have to put it out. And it was like,
exactly.
And they did it. And obviously, the rest is history. So did you have a sort of similar bargaining power? I just wonder also, how did you get on with that kind of approach when, three other members of the band were you ever worried that they were going to say, God, this is taking a bit too long, and possibly leave, or were they quite committed?
Actually, weirdly not, because whenever we played together, we had a really good chemistry between the four of us, and I mean, when we played live, it was never less than completely exciting, So we just musically, we all got such a buzz out of playing together, the four of us, that kept us together when everything else wouldn't work, when nothing else worked, and then of course what happened over time as well was that the equipment got better, and the recording facilities got better, and we got better at using it, and so by the time we got to like the 2000s, and we knew what we were doing exactly, and we knew how to record ourselves and capture our sound completely. So then it just became about the material, and the emphasis was always on me to come up with the material, and so I would like deliver a song to the band, and they, sometimes as a demo, sometimes just playing it to them in the room, and they would inevitably be able to play it better than I could, So it was really exciting to hear everything that I did come alive, in the studio, and we just vibed so well off each other that I think that kept us together when there was no money and it's everything else.
So your follow-up was Mona Lisa, wasn't it? Which was was this the soundtrack?
No, it was. That was the second.
Oh, that was Pandora's Box, wasn't it?
Yeah, Pandora's Box was the soundtrack. I mean, Mona Lisa was. that's the hardest project that I was probably ever involved in with hindsight, and it just took, again, it took far too long, but it was my fault that it took too long. I was far too precious about the production on it. We were still working in analog at that point.
Mm-hmm.
It was all done on 16 track in Carl's living room, most of it, and I was endlessly mixing and remixing for about that album for about a year. And then what happened was I got so sick of it. One day I just peeled all the labels off the DATs that we'd been mixing to, and I just assembled what I thought sounded like the best album out of the mixes that we had. And when I played it to Carl, he was like, yeah, it actually sounds really, really good, but you know that those are all like rough reference mixes that we did in the first weekend, you know. and they were, you know, and it was like, all right. So I wasted a year of my life trying to perfect that album, and it turned out we'd already finished it. I just hadn't realized, you know. And I never made that mistake again, you know. I stopped being so precious about the snare sound and everything after that.
Yes, God, that's amazing. Were you going slightly mad at that stage?
Oh yeah, well, I went mad many times working on Subterraneans records over the years, and yeah, but actually one of the things about it was that I came out of that experience having no idea what the way forward was going to be. None at all. And then we got offered the soundtrack, Pandora's Box soundtrack, which was a completely new lease of life, you know. And also we had a really, really supportive record label at that point, which was Rhythm of Life.
Yes,
it was Paul Haig's label, and Paul Haig from Joseph K. And it was such an amazing moment in my career to be able to do that album and take a step back and make music that I didn't have to write lyrics to, and I didn't have to, you know, it was just a completely new string to the bow, you know, and changed everything for me.
yes.
And it meant that I knew, and also after that I knew that I only had to write songs when I wanted to. I didn't have to write songs to.
So how did you find, or how did he find, you know, Derek Jarman discover you, or sort of think this is it?
Derek.
Yes.
Oh, that was much earlier. That was back in the Angelhead days, in 1990. He was doing a presentation of, I think it was The Garden at Riverside Studios in London, and I was there on a completely unrelated project, and his assistant, who I think his name was Chris, I can't remember, knew who I was for some reason. There was some other connection, and he said, we got talking one day, and he said, yeah, I'm here, I'm working with Derek Jarman. And then I was like, oh, Derek Jarman, I love his work, because I was a huge Ken Russell fan from a very young age. My dad introduced me to the work of Ken Russell when I was like 12.
Oh, The Devils. Did you watch
Yeah,
that?
so I was very familiar with Derek because of Ken Russell, you know. So when he said, oh, would you like to come and meet him? He's in the other room and everything. I went, and just completely, he was one of the, I mean, he was well known for being, you know, one of the nicest people around, you know. But you know, there's somebody made this tribute to Derek. Might have even been a little bit Kennedy, actually, about how he had his real gift was for friendship, you know. And he was very, very kind to me and very sweet to me, and also he recognised the problems that I had as well, and was hugely sympathetic towards those. He introduced me to Dudley Sutton, who he was working with at the time on probably Edward II, I would think would be the film he was doing just then. And then Dudley was very, very influential and important to me. And of course, he actually worked on my first film. So, you know, Dudley kind of got me started as a filmmaker in my own right.
My God. Yes, because from then on, though, your career just blossoms, doesn't it? Things just,
yeah,
it's kind of hard to track what happened.
After Pandora's Box, I felt like I had the right to do anything. You know, I didn't feel like I had to be any one thing anymore. You know,
Yeah.
I wasn't just a singer in a band anymore. I could be a composer, or, you know, what I mean, I could be involved in film or theatre. I just felt much freer after that, and you know, and sometimes I would write poetry, and it would be distinctly different from the way I would write lyrics. And instead of thinking I have to make this into a song, I'd be like, I'll just put it in a book of poetry, you know. And I felt like I was allowed to do anything after that. And what happened then was that the next album that Subterraneans made, because I'd had this totally liberating revelation after Pandora's Box, the next one was made up entirely of songs I was completely committed to and completely passionate about, and that album was Soul Mass Transit, and I felt like that was our masterpiece. And after that, I had nothing else to prove. And when you have nothing to prove, you can just do anything, you know. And it's like, you know, we didn't have a record company trying to make us sell stuff more, and you know, because of the licensing situation, we didn't have anyone breathing down our neck. And so I got ferociously used to being independent at that point, and never wanted to look back. It's like, okay, well, seeing as how I can do anything, I'm going to do everything.
Yes, my God, that's quite extraordinary, because you do start sort of going, you start doing films, don't you, as well? This is the other part of it. Apart from the books of poetry, there is kind of, and also the William Blake Society. So does your mind just kind of do you sort of become like David Bowie in the 70s, where everything just kind of can happen, or does happen?
Well, yeah, I guess so. I mean, you know, I just realized that like I had a voracious appetite to do all kinds of things, and I no longer felt like you know, what I did wasn't my identity anymore, you know, and I didn't care about identity anymore. I felt like after Soul Mass Transit, I felt like that album would stand up for all time as a really, really, really good piece of work, and I didn't feel like I had anything to prove after that. And I think for an artist, that's a hugely liberating moment if you can get to that, because then it doesn't matter anymore. You know, I mean, up until that point, every single time I did anything, I wanted to create a masterpiece. I wanted to create a great, lasting work. And then when I actually felt like I had done, it's like, it doesn't matter now. You know, it doesn't matter if the next album's a load of rubbish, as long as I enjoy making it, as long as it's honest, you know, as long as it's the best I could do at the time, that's good enough. So
yes.
Then I just adopted that philosophy for everything, you know.
Yes. So when you decided to make a film, what was the sort of moment that sort of came up for you? Was this about 2005, 2006?
I did some production work for somebody else on a film, which was put into a festival. It's a film festival in New York. That was 2004, I think. And it didn't occur to me to like make a film of my own until about 2009. I mean, I had like, you know, Super 8 cameras and stuff like that, but I never actually committed to a project of any kind. I would just experiment with things visually. And my dad bought me my first real camera when I was 9 years old for my birthday, which was a Praktica single lens reflex. And I always loved photography, but it always annoyed me that the you know, analog video cameras and things like the early digital video cameras, the quality was so appalling, you know. And my perfect tool for filmmaking would have been like a single lens reflex that made films, you know, rather than just shot stills. But Subterraneans got asked to perform in Berlin at the Berlin Wall on the 20th anniversary of the collapse of the Berlin Wall in 2009, and we couldn't do it for various reasons. Several other people had other commitments, and I thought, I don't want to miss out on this event. It's too cool. I want to be part of this event. It's a really important moment. And so I thought about what I could do, and then I thought, well, I could make a film, you know, and send that, you know. And I spoke to them about the organisers, and they were like, yeah, we'll do that. We're happy to do that. So then I made a film which was inspired by walls, basically. And Albion Rising was the film, and I wanted to get, you know, basically create a soundtrack with a montage of images that I shot on various cheap cameras and different places, including Berlin, but mostly in England. And but then when it came to performing the poetry, I actually realised, well, I needed other people for this. And come to think of it, I do know a few actors. Like I was friends with Juliet Landau and Dudley, and and my friend Suzanne Andrade. And so I just called them all up and said, I've decided to make a film. I need people to read these poems. Would you be up for it? And they all said yes. And they raised the quality much higher than I had any right to expect, because they all did such an amazing job on it. And so the film actually had a life beyond what it was meant to, considering I shot most of it on a camera I bought on eBay for £40.
Yes, well, that's very DIY, isn't it?
But on the one hand, I had the cheapest camera ever, and I had like a really early version of some software on the computer that I was using. And on the other hand, I had Dudley. So on the very first day, I was able to say, "So Dudley, what would Fellini do in this situation?" Things like that, and he would know because he'd worked with him. So I was spoilt with those people, and also at the time, I was spending quite a lot of time with Andrew Birkin, Jane Birkin's brother, who's a screenwriter and filmmaker, and he gave me some really interesting pointers on screenwriting, which I didn't do straight away, which came to be very influential on me later on. And I didn't have to network because I already knew these people through music, and it's just a question of asking for some favors, really.
Yes, absolutely. So was it the case then that with the Subterraneans, it's you could just keep that going while doing other projects and then sort of working with Lena Lovitch as well?
Well, that was a bit different because what happened there was I was running out of steam, really, because I had done so many different things, and we made an album called Subterraneans made an album called This Too Shall Pass, and that after Soul Mass Transit, I thought everything was going to be easy because that album was so easy to make. It was such a breeze to make, and I thought everything was going to be like that, but I was wrong. And This Too Shall Pass was a really difficult album to make, and not as difficult as Mona Lisa, but still up there. And then afterwards, I wanted to do. I just wanted to do something else, and I was unfulfilled in certain ways, like because being the singer in the band and being the front man meant that I could never just cut loose and pretend to be Jimmy Page,
Yes, that's important
stuff that I still wanted to do, and so I decided to take some time out, and then after the last Subterranean show, which was the day before my 40th birthday, I decided I wanted nothing in the diary, just to see what happened, what transpired if I didn't plan anything. And then the very next day, I got a call from Jerome Parker Wells, who was putting together a jazz ensemble, like an experimental jazz ensemble to perform Kurt Weill songs on the road. And he said, "Could you think of anyone interesting to front this band?" And they had John Sinclair on the tour,
right?
The life manager, White Panthers guy, and I thought this could be interesting. But many, many, many years before that, in the early 90s, I spent a bit of time with Nina Hagen. And one day I was playing an album called Tank Battles by Dagmar Krauss from Henry Cow, which were English translations of Kurt Weill songs. And Nina absolutely hated this record and was like, "That's so terrible. She should be singing in German. You should get an English speaker if you want to hear it in English," and all sort of thing. And I remembered her saying Lena Lovitch would have done that so much better. And so I remembered that comment when I was talking to Jerome, and I said, "Well, what about Lena Lovitch? If you can get her, maybe she'll want to do it." And he's like, "That's a great idea." So he went off to see if he could track down Lena, and I didn't think any more of it. And then a few weeks later, I heard from him again, and he's like, "We've got Lena. She's on board. She wants to do the show, but she doesn't want to do all of it herself. We need another singer. Are you available?" So I said, "Yeah, of course, I'll do it." So Lena and I wound up doing this crazy jazz tour of Kurt Weill songs with John Sinclair, and it was really difficult, and because none of us were in our comfort zone at all, and it was obvious to me every single night of that tour that people were coming to see Lena because they hadn't seen her for years. And I said to her, so why don't you go back on the road and just do your own stuff? And she's like, oh, it's for various reasons. She thought it was too difficult. And she because she was sort of the old school music industry, which she fell out with, she didn't want to have to deal with that again. And then I said to her, well, you know what? I've been able to run my band on a shoestring for like 20 odd years now. So it's possible, it's doable. And I said, if you ever want to try something, let me know. And then a couple of months later, she called me up, and I'd been offered a festival in Europe and wanted to know if Subterraneans were available to be her band for the night. And they weren't available. But I said, well, it's the same amount of work to just form a band. If we're going to have to learn a set of songs anyway, we might as well just get a bunch of musicians together who are good and get along with each other, and just get a band together and do it that way. And so we did, and that band wound up. Well, they're still going. I mean, I was in the band for 8 years, but they're actually still going, and they'll be nearly 10 years now. So
that's amazing.
And it brought Lena back from obscurity and got her back on the road, back in front of fans. It was pretty amazing.
Yes.
And I got to just prance around on guitar every night instead, and finally fulfill that ambition. So.
It must be so much nicer occasionally to just know that you can just kind of wander onto the edge of the stage or around the edge of it. It's not being the first, the person who has to sort of come up with some the amusing bit of banter or chat.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I still used to do that periodically, because you could take the boy out of the band, no, it was actually hugely enjoyable to not be the one, at the front, for a change. Really, I've done that for such a long time that, I don't have any hunger left for that, really. And
yes.
So
and going back to your Kurt Weill, because I saw there was an amazing evening with Barry Humphries and Meow Meow doing the work of the Weimar Republic. This was a few years ago in London, and it was kind of quite gripping. Did you enjoy doing the work of Kurt Weill?
I did. I mean, my big moment was doing, Whiskey Bar, Alabama song.
Yes, the Doors.
The Doors had done a great version of that, So yeah. I didn't mind at all trying to live up to Jim Morrison there. But actually, there's a little twist in the tale of that story, because I was visiting my mum at Christmas. Like, I think it was the Christmas after Lane and I started touring together with the Lane Lovitch band, and my mum there was a box of records in my old bedroom in the corner of the room, and I went through it, and that Dagmar Krause album was in there, Tank Battles, and I pulled it out, and it turned out it had nothing to do with Kurt Weill. It was actually an album of Hans Eisler songs. I just remembered it wrong, and so the band that's now been together for nearly 10 years only happened because I completely misremembered a comment that Nina Hagen made 20 years before that.
Yes, well, I think it's quite good to make, we construct these false narratives, don't we, all the time.
It's being right is massively overrated.
Yeah, sometimes, it's like, as long as you do it with innocence and sort of good intention, I think, it's not like, yes, you don't feel like, oh my God, that was terrible, wasn't it? And but then so how do you then sort of? Because did you kind of earlier mention the Angie Bowie moment? How did you? How did you bump into Angie?
God, that's a very good question. It's such a long time. I don't know if I think I happened across her online or something, like in the early days of the internet, and I think she had just done her book, Backstage Passes.
Right. Yeah.
And I heard some music that she had worked on, and I thought it was really interesting. And and I contacted her and I asked her if she had any plans to release it, and she said, "Well, there's a whole album, but I don't know how to do that." And I was like, "Well, I've got a record label. If you're interested, we can look into doing that." And she was, so we did. We put her album out in the UK, and but Angie was such a she is such a force of nature that I just found it hugely inspiring just to talk to her about everything, anything, she's another one of my mentors, for sure. And I've learned so much from her, but also she has her reputation in the media couldn't be further from the truth. They have got her so wrong. It's shocking to me. When my mother died, for example, Angie's advice to me probably saved my sanity. She really, really, really helped me cope with through some very dark times, and so I'm hugely grateful to her. And that's not the sort of thing that Piers Morgan knows about.
Who cares about Piers?
Exactly. But I've seen some really rotten stuff written about her over the years, and it's like I can't even compute that they're talking about the same person. I know.
No, I mean it's very mean and unpleasant, and it's kind of and on that's just as I was saying about that band, Shelley Ann Orphan, where they just had made up a story about who the members of the band were without actually finding out anything about them, just assumed and wrote about it, and it becomes like fact in everyone's mind, but it's like, no, it's not true at all, actually.
Oh God, there's many versions of that going. Yeah, I mean, I once was involved in a Bjork project because I was looking after the estate of Billy Mackenzie at the time, who was a really close friend of mine, and she wanted to do a duet with Billy, and so she on a particular song. So me and Michael Dempsey, who was the associate bass player from that era, who had also played on the first Cure album, we went into the studio looking for this track that she wanted, and we didn't find it. The only version of it that we could find on a multi-track was from a live recording. So we just pulled that off there and sent it to her, and then she gave some interview to like some glossy magazine a while later, Q or Vox or one of those magazines, in which she talked about listening to Billy's multi-tracks and the way he would work and the way he would sing, none of which was true. She never had access to that material at all, and it was a complete lie. And and I actually contacted the One Little Indian and said, what's this bullshit I'm reading, and they were like, "Oh, yeah, it's just press. It's just, don't worry about it. It's just media. It's just to get the column. It will help plug the record or whatever." And so I just let it go. Now it's on Wikipedia. Now it's like, and they use her interview as a source, to talk about how Billy Mackenzie would work in the studio, and it's just nonsense, And I should have been more vigilant about pulling it at the time, But
yes,
now it's an unchallenged fact now, even though
it's horrendous. My God, but it is annoying, and we have sleepless nights being irritated by it. Have you ever sort of thought you'd like to do a documentary about Angie? Because I was saying that because obviously I have an obsession with David Bowie, and I realised that if it wasn't for Angie and Tony DeFries, in a way, David wouldn't have been the person.
I have made a documentary about Angie.
Have you?
Yeah, I've only ever made one documentary in my life. Well, I mean, it's nowhere near finished, but in 2016, I went to Atlanta and I interviewed her for hours on camera about that stuff, because she's really the only living witness now. I mean, from a lot of that, she's the only one who covers the whole of that era when he was actually great, from like 69 to 1980, because for me, Scary Monsters is the last great Bowie moment. You know, I never thought he ever came close to that ever again. But what happened there? If you have time for this, this is my one scrape with Hollywood and the company that we were in discussions with about this film, this documentary. This was like, it happened. This is like 6 or 7 months after he died.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a very, very, very hot topic. And my thing was that I wanted to make a film about Angie, not about David. But because it was a film about Angie, David would inevitably form a huge part of it, a very important part of it, you know. But it wasn't going to be just that, you know. So, and they just could not grasp this, and they kept referring to it as the David Bowie documentary. In every email, they would refer to it as the, you know. And then at one point, they said, "We're a little bit worried that we might meet sort of David Bowie saturation because all these other people are coming out with documentaries." And every single time I communicated with them, I had to say, "You do realise this is not a film about David Bowie. This is a film about Angie." And I got so sick of it. And then, you know, and also I was having a really difficult time professionally and personally. You know, I lost my mother a few months into this project, and end of 2016 she died, and I had to deal with a lot of, like, you know, just personal stuff, like, you know, coping with that. I'd been through a breakup, and my cat died, you know. I don't know, just that it wasn't the right time for me to have to deal with people like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what I did was I took the footage, which I still have, and I just said, well, you know, you're not getting this unless we come to an agreement that we're doing the film that we want to do about Angie. I'm not giving you anything. Because they were like, well, maybe we can make you an offer for your footage. And I was like, no, that's not the way it's going to be, you know. So, but I also learned in that process that I am not a documentarian, you know. That's not the kind of filmmaking that I'm good at. You know, I didn't do the best job on this. And, you know, we're talking about a subject who is somebody who I know really well, and I am well qualified to tell that story because I know her so well. But I still didn't feel like I had the chops to make a good documentary, just technically, you know.
Yeah.
It's very specific talent that you need to be able to do that, and I just don't have it, you know. There was an attempt to make exactly that documentary.
No, it's kind of a shame because I suppose I have an obsession and interest in various things, and sort of, I suppose, the archiving, which is kind of what a documentary is, kind of. I just find it kind of fascinating to just put the story or the record out there
that's part of the problem, though, when you're dealing with somebody like David Bowie, because the truth is doesn't always fit the myth, you know. And you know, the truth is that he wasn't that good to her, you know. They weren't that good for each other. There were terribly toxic moments in that relationship which wouldn't show him in a particularly good light, and people prefer the myth, you know. And but there were people who were actually angry with us for wanting to tell the truth about him, you know. And in particular the companies, you know, they just want to sell something. They don't really, and their thing is like, they don't want, they at no point were they willing to be the company that told the raw, uncut truth about David Bowie, with the good and the bad, you know. I mean, we were never going to take away from him what a genius he was. You know what I mean? That was never going to happen because he was. You know, there's no debate about that. But at the same time, it's like, you know, my thing has always been that I think it's more useful to say to people, you know, these people, they're not gods, they're just human beings. But isn't it amazing what human beings can do? You know, like John Lennon or whoever it is, you know, just look at what human beings can do when they're not fucking each other over, basically. You know what I mean? And which is what I seem to spend most of the time doing. Human beings can do amazing, wonderful, important, lasting, inspirational things. And that was really the angle that I wanted to take, to say, you know, just to humanise him and say, look, David Bowie was a human being. What an amazing thing he did just by being a human being, you know, and also, but then at the same time, to humanise him, you have to tell the truth. You have to say he wasn't perfect and he did do a few awful things, but it's like Princess Diana, you know, they don't want to hear it, you know, they just, you know, they're always going to shoot the messenger.
Yes, well, it's kind of it is interesting, and I'm sort of fascinated because it's kind of interesting because and there's so much to sort of try and sort of unravel with that because the stuff he did in the 60s was pretty forgettable, and if it wasn't for what happens next, we'd have completely deleted it in Woolworths, really.
Yeah, I mean, and then also, you know, if you think about like the length of his marriage to Angie, those 11 years from 69 to 1980 when they got divorced, those were his best years, and you know, I don't think anyone can argue with that. I mean, even people who like his later work can't possibly think it's better than anything he produced between 1969 and 1980, you know. I mean, really, you know, if you think it's from Space Oddity to Ashes, I mean, almost flawless for a decade, you know. And
no, I mean, there was one album a year, several live albums, 2 records he produced with, you know, Lou Reed and Iggy Pop, and relocated in various kind of places around the world. And I just think, you know, I don't know how anyone could have done that, you know, and made a few films as well. I still don't quite. I can't imagine.
Also, you know, one of the things is as well, you know, with hindsight, you know, he has this amazing reputation for having huge concepts, and obviously, you know, Ziggy Stardust, Aladdin Sane, Diamond Dogs, all that stuff where he knew exactly what he was doing. But occasionally he made records when he had no idea what he was doing. And I think those are his best works for me, which would be Man Who Sold the World, Station to Station, and Low. And I think that those are his best works, when he was just seeing what was out there, experimenting, and being willing to go out on a limb and not caring what the record company thought, you know. And so there's that, you know, I liked him when he was at his loosest and least sort of conceptual, really, you know.
Yes, well, it's I think, I don't know, I know recently there's been this new podcast, Main Man Productions, with Tony DeFries, who's been talking about.
Still alive.
Well, it is worth having a listen to all these because not only does Tony DeFries talks a lot about his stuff and the history of it, he's also got a lot of the characters who were there as well, who've also telling their side of the story as well. So there is kind of quite a bit more in there, which is fascinating. And then, you know, recently John Cambridge has brought his book out, The Drummer, and talks about how he got sacked from being in the band, and then Woody takes over. So there's a lot of kind of stories that are sort of like people, because John Cambridge said, you know, I just wanted to tell my story of what really happened in that time, not hear some sort of like, well, that's not, you know, that was the kind of motivation. I think, no, I need to write my book because I'm really fed up with hearing this kind of idea, and it wasn't like that at all.
They made a documentary about Mick Ronson a few years ago, which they tragically called Beside Bowie, which I think completely underrates Mick Ronson, you know, and at no point really did I ever get the impression that they were willing to come right out and say, you know, that Mick Ronson was the only person who ever shared a stage with David Bowie who really gave him a run for his money, you know, because he did. You know?
Yes.
Which is probably why, you know, it didn't last.
But a couple of months ago, I did an interview. Actually, I'll see if I might even. Oh shit! I don't know if I've got it there. I've got a whole Bowie section there, you might have seen. Anyway, look, I did this interview with this guy called Robin Mayhew, which was quite interesting.
I know that name. Why do I know that name?
Because he was in a band called The Presidents from the 60s, but he was very good on sound.
Presidents of the United States of America. Was it?
No, from the 60s, one of those beat bands. It looks quite religious, that cover. Anyway, he
It
was
looks
in
like
this.
a Scientology book.
He does, actually. Actually, quite a few of the Bowie band were Woody and Mick Garson.
Yeah.
Anyway, so he was in this band, and then he became a bit of a sound engineer, and then he got a tap on the shoulder because Bowie had played a live gig, and it was really terrible. And Angie
Right.
Bowie came up to him and said, "Look, I've just listened to your band. You know how to do the sound, don't you? Do you want to work with us?" And he said, "Yeah, okay." And he went on tour for 2 years and did Ziggy Stardust, the actual tour for two. But then he becomes a sound man. Now, when you mentioned about the Passions, I kind of got the impression the way his business came to an end was he rented his equipment to this band, and they went to Italy, and everything burnt down to a ground, and they didn't have any insurance. And I'm sure that was the Passions.
Right.
Or Flying Lizard. Oh, I should have got this. I didn't know we were going to talk about the Passions or Flying Lizard, actually. But I would have rehearsed that a bit more. But anyway, it's kind of interesting. But again, it was kind of Angie who said, "Look, we need this man on our side because he can do the sound engineering, and we've got a terrible sound." Anyway,
Yeah.
and he sent me he probably shouldn't have done, but he sent me the live album from the recording studio with a copy of the ticket. Which was very sweet of him. He obviously was sorting out his stuff. Anyway, sorry, that was a bit of a detour, but yeah, it was just kind of interesting when you do these interviews with people and they kind of give you those little insights into how things kind of happened. And it kind of came back to Angie, who said, who was the one who tapped him on the shoulder and said, could you come and do the sound for us? Because, our band, I think that was when Bowie was doing Hype at the time, and it was just a noise and a mess.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, I can sort all that out. And it was like suddenly Ziggy Stardust, and he spent 2 years doing that. So that was the end. That was it. So look, on that exciting note, what's your next project that you're working on at the moment?
I'm working on a film called Little Johnny Jewel, which is all set in Marshalltown, Iowa, and then I'm planning more films after that, and I'm, also, I mean, in terms of music, I've done 2 albums with a pianist called Marina Vesic, who's based in Vienna, and we have a duo called Your Ghost, and we did a couple of and albums which were piano rearrangements mostly of Subterraneans songs, actually, and a few other bits and pieces here and there. And I wrote a couple of new songs for the last one, and so that's a kind of open-ended thing. If I feel like doing a song, I just throw the idea at Marina, and then I get a perfectly recorded piano arrangement back in the ether within a couple of days, and then so I'm gonna, I think we're going to do. We don't know what we're going to do next yet, but we are going to do something for sure. We're not anywhere close to done yet. In terms of live performances, because of COVID, I haven't really. Hasn't even crossed my mind, I mean, the last live performance that I did with Lena was 28th of October, I think it was. So it's almost at the 2-year anniversary of my last live appearance, and in 2019. And little, of course, did I realise that was the last live performance that anyone was going to do for a while.
Yes.
So I got out at the right time, really, with all that stuff. So I don't know. That said, I was recently, through someone's generosity, I recently came into possession of a very, very nice guitar, a Gibson Les Paul, the best, nicest one I've ever seen or touched, which I now own. And I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do with it, but it would seem rude not to use it now that I have it. So,
yes, absolutely. My God.
And like I say, I did some experimental sound with Guy from Subterraneans, and also Amanda Kramer from Psychedelic Furs. She did some piano, some keyboard stuff for us, and it was very interesting actually, and that's going to be on a soundtrack of an experimental film that I made, which is my tribute to Derek Jarman, and which is long overdue. So yeah, it's quite a lot going on, and somebody suggested that I once did a collection of lyrics, and it covered like the first arbitrary 17 years of my career, and it turns out that was 17 years ago now. So they're saying that volume 2 is about due. So that, which would be a book. I don't know if I'm going to do that. And also, I've got a ton of paintings that I've done as well, which people have been saying to me, "Oh, you should exhibit your paintings." And
my God, you've got a lot on, haven't you? There is a lot to sort out.
Yeah. I mean, at the moment, I'm up to my ears in making the film, so that's the most important thing right now.
Yes, absolutely. And just last question. I mean, if you could have whispered something into your 16 or 18-year-old self starting out, is there any kind of little bit of worldly advice that you would have thought, oh yeah, that would have been quite handy to have known, or would it have been like, they wouldn't have listened if I'd mentioned anything?
Well, yeah, I think really what I would tell myself to be less precious about things, with things like, for example, one of the reasons that we never got, the level of like press that we deserved probably at that time was because I wanted the music to do the talking. I was very adamant that I wanted the music to do the talking, that I wanted to succeed without using those sort of tools, and fuck MTV and all this sort of stuff. I had this very radical, very militant idea of the right and wrong way to promote yourself.
Yes.
And nowadays, I think I would just say to myself, just do the flipping interview. Just do because if you don't, there'll be like 20 other people who will, and I would just, so I would tell myself to be less precious about things like that. But also I would remind myself, just tell the truth all the time, because then you don't ever have to try to remember what it was you said. The only thing, if you tell the truth all the time, the only thing you're in danger of doing is repeating yourself. You're not actually in danger of ever being caught, in a lie. So,
yes, you don't have to remember what the story is.
Yeah, you only have to remember what actually happened as best as you can.
And then you can't be sort of like, oh yes, that's true. Did you have an experience like that then?
When I was very young, I did. Yeah, when I was at school, because there was a parent-teacher evening when I guess I would have been about 8 or 9 years old, probably, and I used to sit next to somebody in class whose father was a doctor, and they used to seat you alphabetically in those days. So his surname began with a P and mine begins with an R, which is why I sat next to him. And then my parents came home from this meeting with my teacher, accusing me of having lied and said that my dad was a doctor. And it was immediately obvious to me that the teacher just got me mixed up with the kid that sits next to me in the class, But when you're that age, the inclination is not to believe you. The inclination is, you know what I mean? So, yeah, I was a bit, I suffered some righteous indignation at a very young age, and I blamed adults for it. So I still feel that way about adults, actually.
Yes, God, it can be hard to let that go at that age. It feels so kind of humiliating.
Yeah. But I just sort of thought, if I was just relentlessly true, honest as I could be, and of course, the funny thing about being honest is, it is not because from any moral reason. It's just because it's easier. I'm too lazy to make something up. I don't think anything's actually worth lying about anyway. But also, I just really, I can tell the same story 10 different ways, but the story's basically the same.
Yes.
Helps you. I think it helps your memory. It stops you getting confused about things if you just only have to remember one thing.
This is true. Now look, this is brilliant. Are you ever going to come back to Norwich? Well, not come back, but you're going to visit Norwich again?
Don't know.
Probably not.
I mean, I'm currently in the immigration system over here, so that takes a long time. So I can't say with any certainty when. But also, nobody has been travelling in the last 12 months anyway, really, because of the COVID situation. So, yeah, I mean, maybe one day I'll get to visit. And
a fine city that is Norwich, isn't it?
Yeah, I have some very fond memories of Norwich. I was in Norwich on one New Year's Eve early in this century, and they used to project. They probably still do it, but they used to project stuff onto the town hall.
Yes,
in the big square. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I just remember this gigantic projection of Nicholas Parsons, who, of course, is, for many people of my generation and older, embodies Norwich. You know, Sale of the Century was
Sale of the Century, wasn't it? Yes.
Big Norwich show when I was a kid. So,
nice.
Yeah, that and Commons mustard, which, of course, I can get Commons mustard here. That's the only mustard I ever buy. So
you have loyalty, haven't you, to the place?
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, look, thank you ever so much. This has been amazing. You have a recording as well now, don't you? So,
well, I have one side of it.
But look, thanks. And if you want, I can always send you the link to it, and then you can always use it. But that would be no problem. But thanks again for this time. And look, best of luck for your future and everything else that you're doing. But anyway,
really nice to speak to you.
Yeah, take care then. See you later.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. And that's how you finish a conversation. Snappy, you say. Well, perhaps not. But anyway, look, I enjoyed listening to that last moment. And that was me in conversation with Jude Rawlins about life, love, poetry. You've just listened to it, so you don't need me to babble on, do you? Anyway, this has been the C86 Show. David Eastaugh. If you want to contact me, you can on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Do C86 Show. These have all been archived. You can find those on Spotify, iTunes, and Podbean. Indeed, you can. Anyway, look, have a great week. Stay safe.